He called my command line interface adorable. That's when I knew we had a problem. My name's Rowan Black. I'm 43. For the last 7 years, I was the lead systems architect at a mid-sized enterprise SaaS firm based out of Columbus, Ohio. Well, technically, I was also one of the founding engineers. Back when we worked out of a co-working space with one espresso machine, a leaky roof, and a dog named Winston who handled HR better than most humans, I built the infrastructure. The real kind. Not the slide decks or the KPI dashboards. The code base. The back end. The logic that actually made things run when the shiny marketing layer failed. They called it legacy now, which was their polite way of saying we'd rather not understand how this works. But they didn't complain when the system scaled past 40,000 concurrent users. Or when we survived a 72-hour outage thanks to a failover routine I wrote in a Red Bull haze during Christmas of 2019. I don't wear branded hoodies. I don't post GIFs in Slack. I don't need to. I speak the language of uptime, of redundancy, of long-haul code that doesn't break under pressure. So when the new CTO arrived, Leo, a Sen 30-something too confident, probably reads startup manifestos in the shower. I knew things were going to break. Not the code, the trust. He showed up on a Monday morning Zoom like he was launching a TED Talk. White walls, wide smile ring, light reflection in his pupils. He opened with a line I'll never forget. What we need is velocity through clarity, alignment through disruption. One of the interns clapped. I muted my mic. He spent 20 minutes talking about sunsetting the scaffolding, which in real terms meant I'm going to fire the people who built this. And then halfway through the call, he shared his screen and pulled up our system diagram. I leaned in, not because I was impressed, but because I wanted to see how far he'd take it. He started drawing red circles around modules I had personally written. One of them, a memory-checking demon that had saved us from a silent data leak last year. He labeled it over-engineered, said we should rethink how we approach complexity. Then he scrolled down to our CLI tools. The interface I'd spent months refining to make onboarding easier for junior engineers. And he smiled. This is adorable. Like, it's kind of cute, right? Feels like something from a 2005 hacker movie. I didn't reply, but in that moment something locked in. That's the thing about people like Leo. They think if they talk fast and smile wide, they can delete the foundation and call it progress. Over the next 2 weeks, he started realigning. Code reviews were slashed in half. He renamed our sprint board to the War Room. Introduced some overpriced AI code copilot that spams suggestions with 80% bug potential. Then came the one-on-ones. He started pulling my junior devs aside for mentorship chats. Translation extract intel while making them doubt me. One of them messaged me after. He said my tests were too emotionally safe. What does that even mean? I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I was already documenting everything. Here's what they didn't know. A long time ago, back in 2013, I got burned. Bad. Another CTO? Another startup? Same story, I built the back end, they built the exit plan without me. They fired me, then sold the architecture to a partner I'd introduced. I had no clause, no protection. I watched everything I created get handed off like it was a free sample. After that, I made a rule. Every job, every project, I added one thing, a reversion clause. Quiet. Legal. Buried in the boilerplate. Most people never read it, especially founders drunk on Series B term sheets. Back in the present, Leo was gaining speed. He launched a new internal Slack thread, #Innovation Hub. Didn't invite me, but someone forwarded the messages. One thread featured a screenshot from our billing dashboard with the caption, Legacy UX, time to evolve. I stared at it. That dashboard had caught a 6-figure discrepancy last quarter, and now it was a joke. Something to step over. That night I opened a folder on my personal drive, churchpancakerecipes.zip. Inside it, forked Git logs, private Slack exports, screenshots, system architecture maps with my initials still in the corner, and one more file, employment contract, onboarding, final v3 PDF. I scrolled to page 7, clause 14.2. In the event of termination, without 90 days written, notice all intellectual property developed by employee shall revert to the employee effective immediately. I'd forgotten how clean it was. No legal fluff, no ambiguity. My ex-wife Mitchell's her last name now had written it. Back then we were still speaking. She knew the industry, knew me, and knew exactly how to protect someone who was always too tired to fight. So I saved the file, flagged it red, sent it to my personal email with one subject line. Clause 14.2 still valid. And just before closing the laptop, I added a note to myself. If they fire me, don't shout. Just send the invoice. If you've ever built something they later tried to take away from you, subscribe. This is only the beginning. By the third week, I stopped getting calendar invites. No more roadmap meetings, no architecture reviews, no one-on-ones. Just silence. The kind that doesn't feel accidental. I wasn't let go. Not officially. But I'd been moved out of the current like a branch in a stream that stops getting water. And Leo, he was getting louder. He started a weekly fireside chat on Zoom called Velocity Talks. Just him, a slide deck, and whatever intern was brave enough to nod along. He'd pace in front of the camera like a coach at halftime, using phrases like forward-leaning disruption and redundancy as inertia. He never said my name, but he didn't have to. When he said legacy thinking, they all looked down. When he said we need to sunset the scaffolding, they looked away. And then came the nickname. One of the junior engineers said it in passing, trying to be funny. Rowan's like the legacy whisperer. It caught on, not in a cruel way at first, just a kind of amused dismissal. They said it with a smirk, like I was a harmless old dog who still remembered the way things used to work. But I heard what was underneath it. They didn't mean I understood the legacy system. They meant I was the legacy. Leo, to his credit, didn't stop at culture. He went for the infrastructure. He announced a full review of our internal tooling stack. Said he was creating a new task force, Innovation Custodians. And somehow I wasn't invited, not even CC'd. So I watched from the sidelines as half-trained juniors opened up systems they didn't recognize, started renaming files they didn't author, and left breadcrumbs in the logs like digital graffiti. One of them removed a lockout timer I'd embedded to prevent API overload. Another deleted a config file labeled Do Not Touch v3, thinking it was a leftover. It wasn't. That file governed the rollback path for our client-side authentication. Now we had no clean way to revert changes without resetting the session store across the whole user base. No one noticed. Yet. Meanwhile, Leo launched a new Slack channel, #Innovation Hub. It was his personal playground. He posted long threads every day, usually screenshots of broken UX from years ago, or pie charts showing what he called velocity friction. And always with captions like, "Time to evolve. Old doesn't mean right. Let's break patterns before they break us." The channel grew fast. Lots of reactions. Rocket emojis, clapping hands, lightning bolts. I wasn't in the channel. Technically, I could have joined. It was public. But I didn't. I wanted to see how long they'd pretend I didn't exist. It didn't bother me the way they probably hoped. I've seen this before. The teardown. The performance theater. The belief that if you rename enough variables, no one will remember who wrote the function. What did bother me was the silence from the people who used to sit beside me. People I onboarded, mentored. People whose names I still remembered from their very first Git commits. They stopped replying to my messages, stopped saying hi in the hallway, stopped tagging me in bugs they couldn't solve. I became invisible, which was fine. Because when you've been erased once before, you learn to leave behind copies. I started exporting things, quietly. Slack logs, code diffs, screenshots of project boards where my name used to be attached to every core feature. Nothing aggressive, just insurance. And every night after I logged off, I backed up one folder. The same one I'd started years ago. Church pancake recipes. No one ever asked what it was. Why would they? To them, it was just a weird archive on a systems drive that hadn't been touched in ages. But inside that folder were the maps. Dependency chains, license paths, original architecture blueprints with metadata dates, version signatures. Even the old debug console mockups I used to sketch by hand before we had design support. The DNA of the product. Lineage they didn't know still mattered. Leo thought I was just drifting. I could see it in how he spoke to me when he did, which wasn't often. Once in the break room, he walked by and said, Still holding down the fort, Rowan. I nodded, didn't say a word. He smiled like a man who'd already erased you in his mind. Like he was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. That night I opened Clause 14.2 again. Read it slowly, not because I doubted it, but because I needed to remind myself that sometimes silence is just the sound of a trap resetting itself. They hadn't fired me yet, but they would. I could feel it coming. The build-up, the playbook, the slow squeeze until you're either gone or obsolete. But this time I wasn't the same engineer they tried to erase a decade ago. This time I had my hands on the foundation, and they didn't even know it. I didn't push back. Not publicly, not in meetings, not even in Slack. There's something I learned a long time ago: when you know they're going to erase you, it's better to go quiet first. It makes the silence theirs to break. So I kept showing up, on time, polite, professional. When people stopped asking for my input, I nodded. When junior engineers started repeating ideas I'd already documented months ago, I let them. One even sent me a private message. "Hey, I think I just came up with a cleaner way to handle session persistence." He pasted in a block of code. It was my code, line for line, forked from a staging branch I'd archived in Q4. I didn't reply. I just screenshotted the message. Saved it to a folder titled Echoes. Every night after work, I spent an hour curating. Logs, threads, change histories. I exported every Confluence page I'd edited, every roadmap I'd co-authored, every system diagram that still had my initials embedded in the XML comments. Not because I was paranoid, but because I'd seen this dance before. Leo wasn't building something new. He was rebuilding my work in his image, with shinier colors and louder buzzwords. But the bones were mine. One night I watched a recorded product pitch he gave to a potential partner. The screen share was low res, but I knew every shape on that diagram. It was the API framework I'd written during a 3-week deployment sprint. He renamed it, changed the font, added a version 2.0 label. But the structure, the request flow, the load balancing logic, all mine. He even kept my original default rate limiter values. I paused the video, then rewound it, took a screen recording, labeled it Presentation Dark Theft, MKV. I saved it to the main folder and backed it up to 2 separate encrypted drives. Not because I planned to use it, not yet, but because people like Leo never think documentation matters until it does. About a week later, someone tried to audit my code. One of Leo's innovation custodians, fresh out of boot camp, still called functions things. He opened one of my core modules in the repo and left a comment. Possible redundant loop could be optimized. I read it twice. He was flagging a recursive sanity check I'd built to trap memory leaks under stress load. The thing had caught 2 outages in the last 6 months, silently, efficiently. I didn't respond, just took a screenshot. Added it to a document I'd started building. Audit Failures V1. I knew what Leo was doing. It wasn't just about removing me. He needed to justify removing me. That meant turning my work into clutter. Rewriting the narrative so that anything stable was actually outdated. Anything cautious was inflexible. And anything I designed was suddenly a bottleneck. He was trying to create failure where there had been resilience. And people were starting to believe it. Not because it was true, but because belief is easier than investigation. The interns stopped looking me in the eye. Project managers started copying Leo's language. Legacy pain points, process inertia, overbuilt compliance flow. It was like watching your reflection warp in real time. Still your shape, but twisted. One evening I got an alert. My name had been removed from the commit history of a core deployment script. Technically, they'd overwritten the attribution by copying the file into a new branch. But the logic was unchanged. Even the comments were mine, just trimmed down. I archived the diff, annotated it, filed it under erasure attempts, scripts, live ops, push, H. Then I started building something new. Not code, not revenge. Just a record. I opened a fresh document and called it Reversion Trigger Kit. Inside, Clause 14.2 scanned, signed, and highlighted. Git log exports of every major commit I'd authored. A chain of Slack conversations showing my authorship. Architecture maps with timestamps from pre-CTO era. Screenshots of deleted references to my name in current project boards. In the pitch video, the one where Leo presented my framework as his, I didn't know when they'd fire me, but I knew they would. And when that happened, I didn't want to argue, didn't want to explain, didn't want to defend anything. I just wanted to send a folder, a quiet surgical package, the kind of thing that doesn't ask for attention. It demands it because the facts are undeniable. I closed the laptop, poured a glass of water, stared at the lights on my modem blinking quietly in the dark. Then I whispered to no one. This time they won't get to rewrite the ending. And I meant it. The contract was old, dated, buried under layers of HR paperwork no one had touched in years. But I knew where to look. I found it in the archive system they never migrated properly. Still labeled under its original upload name, Onboarding, Legacy, V3, Final PDF. I opened it in a private window, scrolled slowly. Page after page of the usual legal noise non-compete arbitration clause confidentiality. Then page 7. There it was. In the event of termination, without 90 days written notice, all intellectual property developed by the employee, whether solely or in collaboration, shall revert to the employee effective immediately upon notice. Plain language, no tricks, no loopholes, just a sentence most people would have skimmed past. But not me. Because this time I had help writing it. My ex-wife, before she was my ex, was a contract attorney. Tough. Quiet. The kind of woman who could draft a liability waiver with one hand while sipping cold brew with the other. She added that clause during our second round of contract revisions. Back when I was debating whether to leave my last job and join this company full-time. At the time, it felt excessive. Like putting up a fence before building the house. But she said it's not for now. It's for the version of you that forgets how this feels. She meant the sleepless nights. The code I wrote that got demoed without credit. The meetings where I fixed everything, silently, while someone else got the applause. I remember signing that contract in a rented conference room. The table smelled like fresh carpet glue and startup optimism. The kind where everyone's dreaming big, but no one's looking down. The founder, Andy, barely read it. Just smiled and said, "You're the guy who makes this real right." He was right, I was. That clause sat there for 7 years, untouched, unbothered, unneeded, until now. I printed the contract, not on office paper. On my own, cream stock, heavyweight, the kind that folds like it means something. Then I highlighted the clause in neon yellow, wrote next to it in clean red ink, "Still binding, confirm jurisdiction, RB." I slid it into a manila folder and filed it under my desk, just above a labeled USB drive that held the full repo backup commit history and framework architecture docs from the last 3 product cycles. They never noticed I was collecting, because people like Leo don't expect the quiet ones to be preparing. That week, the signs got louder. My calendar was wiped clean. No more stand-ups, no check-ins from project managers. Even the automated reports I used to receive from the QA pipeline were redirected permissions revoked. One of the juniors accidentally sent me a Slack meant for their mentor group. "Leo says we're sunsetting the old deployment script this week. Anyone know where it actually lives?" I knew, of course I knew. I wrote it, twice. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled up a visual dependency map I built 2 years earlier. It showed how that deployment script linked to our metrics API, which routed into the data pipeline which governed the analytics toolset Leo was planning to show investors next quarter. I annotated the node, saved it as chain risk snapshot PNG. Then I added it to the clause packet. The folder was growing. Later that evening, I got an email from my old friend Mitchell. He's not my lawyer, not officially, but we go back far enough. I forwarded the contract and asked, "Still enforceable?" He replied 10 minutes later, subject ironclad, body. "They won't see it coming. Let them finish the mistake. No emotion, just law." Exactly what I needed. I started sleeping better after that. Not because I felt powerful, just prepared. There's a kind of calm that comes with being underestimated. When they think you've faded, you get to work in the shadows. You get to build the wall they don't realize they'll crash into. The next day, I watched Leo announce a new platform initiative during his Velocity talk. He called it the Next Arc. Same backend, same flow, just a new name and a fresh coat of colors. He talked about revolutionizing the product stack, said it would set a new baseline for agility. And I sat there in the same virtual room, my mic muted, my camera off, watching him lay my blueprints down like his own. No one questioned it. Why would they? To them, I was the past. A shadow in the server logs. Someone who whispered config changes and vanished. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. And certainly not without leaving behind something worth reading. It happened on a Friday. Of course it did. Fridays are made for layoffs. Soft landings before the weekend. Easier to ignore the wreckage until Monday. I was halfway through reviewing a deployment flag error when my screen blinked. Zoom invite. From Leo. Subject line quick sync. No calendar event, no agenda. Just a random link dropped into my inbox at 3:02 p.m. I clicked it. No point pretending I didn't see it. The call started with Leo's camera off. Then flicked on like he was finishing a podcast intro. He was in the same room he always used. Plants in the background, brushed metal wall light, wearing one of those tech-branded fleece vests like he'd just stepped off a VC panel. He gave me a smile I'd seen before. Tight. Practiced. The kind people wear when they're about to say something they think you already know. Hey Rowan, appreciate you jumping on? I nodded. So, I've been giving a lot of thought to structure, roles, where we're headed. He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head like he was doing a LinkedIn profile shoot. And I think it's time we, simplify the scaffolding. Retire some of the legacy. I waited. Let him have his moment. He paused for emphasis. Looked at his notes. Like this was a speech he'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. Long story short, you're no longer with the company as of today. We're streamlining. That word again. Streamlining. It always sounds so clean, like nothing's actually being cut, just rearranged. But I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. What did catch me off guard was the tone. It was too casual. No HR rep, no paperwork, no offboarding checklist. Just Leo smiling, sipping from a hydro flask the size of a small fire extinguisher. He added, I mean, your fingerprints are all over our success. You should be proud, honestly. Then he chuckled. All your ideas, they belong to us now, right? And that was it. A line so careless I almost believed he meant it as a joke. But I knew better. To him this was closure. The last scene in a story where the legacy guy fades out and the rocket ship takes off. 15 minutes after the call ended, I got a Slack message. Hey man, sorry we didn't get to wrap up earlier. Sending good vibes. Let me know if you need anything for your next chapter. Cheers. No signature, no documents, no access review, no termination letter. Just vibes. I closed the message. Opened my drawer. Took out the manila folder. Clause 14.2 stared back at me, neon highlighted and circled in red. No anger, no revenge rush, just clarity. Everything was now exactly where it needed to be. I powered down my workstation, unplugged my secondary drive, checked that the backups synced overnight. Then I walked to the window. Outside the sky was doing that winter thing, gray without drama. Cold, but not interesting. It felt fitting. I didn't call anyone, didn't text Mitchell, didn't write a post about it. Because when you've been preparing for erasure, the moment it actually happens doesn't sting. It lands like a notification you've already read. What struck me most wasn't the way it happened. It was the silence after. No announcement, no team email, no Slack thread saying goodbye or thank you or good luck. Just deletion. 1 second I existed in their system, the next I didn't. Even my calendar invites evaporated, archived into someone else's ownership. But the thing about systems is deletion is never real. It's just redirection, a shift in where the truth lives. And the truth, it still lived in every commit, every backup, every comment thread they forgot to scrub. They thought they'd sunset me. What they didn't know was that sunset triggers the clause. And clause 14.2 was more than just a paragraph in a contract. It was a mirror, waiting to be turned around, reflecting everything they took and everything they failed to protect. I slid the folder into my backpack. Shut off the lights. Locked the door to the office I no longer worked in. Then walked out. Not away, not down, just towards something else. Something I'd written years ago when I still believed people read contracts. That belief was gone now. But the contract still valid. And now it was alive. I got home that night just after 6. Took off my jacket. fed the cat, poured a glass of water. Then I sat at my desk and opened the folder. The same one I'd been quietly building for weeks. The one labeled Reversion Trigger Kit. Everything was in place. Clause 14.2 highlighted. Employment contract scanned and annotated. Git logs exported with author tags and timestamps. Slack threads archived as PDFs with red receipts. System diagrams dated, signed, and versioned. Video evidence screen recordings of Leo pitching my architecture. I didn't need emotion, didn't need flair. All I needed was the truth. I opened a new email draft. To CEO, Legal Internal Counsel C.C. Mitchell, my legal proxy, subject, immediate IP reversion, per Employment Clause 14.2. Body. As per the attached agreement and following my termination on insert date, without 90 days written notice, I am initiating reversion of all intellectual property developed during my tenure. This includes, but is not limited to, back-end infrastructure design, API authentication framework, system automation protocols, deployment scripts, internal documentation, supporting architecture plans. Continued use of these materials constitutes infringement under the terms of the agreement. Please see attached, signed contract, Git contribution logs, system blueprint diagrams, detailed usage invoice. I am open to discussing provisional licensing under a new agreement. Regards, Rowan Black. Then I opened the invoice. It wasn't a round number. No one trusts round numbers. It was $2,427,910.46, calculated from internal license projections, third-party equivalency estimates, and hourly development valuation over 7 years. At the bottom, a note. This figure includes unpaid usage post-termination breach of clause penalties and commercial exposure tied to ongoing platform relaunch using proprietary frameworks. I reviewed the files one last time, clicked attach, clicked send. No threats, no calls, no follow-up messages. Just one precise email, sent at 9:01 a.m. the following morning. Let them open it over coffee. Let the clause speak first. I didn't expect a reply. These things don't generate noise right away. They generate silence. The kind that builds slowly, behind doors, in legal offices, in investor threads. And that silence, it's louder than any confrontation. By noon, I could see the system logs changing. One by one, modules I had authored were being accessed, reviewed, annotated. Like they were scrambling to verify if what I claimed was real. It was. Every commit was there. Every feature traceable. Every framework tied directly to my credentials. Some of them even still had comments in the code with my name in the tag. R Black, temp fix optimize later. They never changed it. A few hours later, someone from legal opened my LinkedIn profile. Then Mitchell's. Then the post I'd written 3 years ago about the importance of protecting developer authorship. I watched the page views come in one by one. No likes, no comments, just eyes. The kind that didn't want to be seen. Mitchell sent me a short text that afternoon. Quiet over there? Perfect, I replied. Because the longer they didn't respond, the more pressure built behind the silence. And pressure in the corporate world doesn't explode. It folds. It bends budgets. It delays launches. It makes people ask hard questions about things they never used to care about. Like contracts. Like Clause 14.2. Like who really wrote the foundation they're standing on. That night I updated the folder, created a subfile active status reversion live, dropped in a copy of the sent email the invoice and a note to myself. Sent 9:01 a.m. watched, no response, holding position. Then I shut the lid on my laptop. No need to chase. They had the message and the bill. If you've ever been told you didn't matter but knew the system couldn't run without you, you already understand why Clause 14.2 exists. Subscribe if you know what it's like to walk away quietly and still own the room. They launched it 2 days later, 3:00 a.m. on a Thursday, coward hours. No press release, no pre-launch hype, just a quiet push in a Slack thread that said, "Shipping complete, Velocity realized." Leo posted a selfie in front of the office espresso machine an hour later. Caption, "We shipped, we soared." Rocket emoji, lightning bolt, hashtag nextarc. I just watched. Didn't react, didn't refresh, didn't need to. Because I knew exactly what they launched. Same backend. Same service layer. Same system topology I'd mapped out 3 years earlier when we rebuilt the infrastructure for scale. They didn't even rename the environment variables. The only things that had changed were the font on the dashboard and the labels on the navigation bar, and they'd stripped out the one module I told them not to touch. The one I'd written for high-volume token validation. Said it was too cautious, too complex. What they meant was, they didn't understand what it did, so they removed it. That module wasn't flashy. It didn't have an interface, didn't show up on user reports, but it did one thing, and it did it well. It prevented session hijacking under heavy load, checked for concurrency anomalies, logged silent failures to a private loop only I could see. And without it, the whole thing was like a bridge with no maintenance sensors. Looked fine from a distance, but the weight would build, and when it did, they'd feel it. The launch went live. I tracked it in the logs because yes, I still had monitoring access through a webhook they forgot to disable. Requests spiked, traffic climbed, the system held. At first, everything looked clean. Charts were up, latency down. Leo's team was celebrating. I let them. Because the difference between failure and collapse isn't always obvious at the start. It builds quietly. In the gaps, you don't measure. By noon that day, the feedback started rolling in. Enterprise clients were having login delays. Session expirations weren't syncing across devices. Support tickets flagged intermittent auth issue in increasing frequency. Their Discord server got noisier. Nothing dramatic, just little ripples. Can't log in. Lost access during demo. Session timeout mid-call. The kinds of complaints that don't trigger alarms until they compound. Leo posted another message. Appreciate your patience. New era always comes with growing pains. Classic deflection. Blame the future, soften the present. But internally, they were scrambling, trying to patch with no map, fixing issues in a framework they barely understood. One of the junior engineers, I recognized his name, pushed a hotfix to disable a validation script I'd embedded. The script's job was to block suspicious token reuse. He didn't know that. To him, it just looked like noise. The patch made things worse. That evening, I checked the incident log again. API failure rate had doubled. Load balancer reroutes were firing every 10 minutes. Latency spikes were hitting regions with their top-paying clients. No public message yet, but I knew what was happening inside. Meetings, Slack pings, people pointing fingers at the wrong variables. I'd been in those rooms. I knew the sound of code breaking from the inside out. It doesn't crash loudly. It softens, pulls apart, until the structure stops responding. Friday morning, their homepage had a banner. We're improving stability for an even better experience. Which in tech PR means we broke something, and the person who built it doesn't work here anymore. I didn't gloat, didn't send a message, didn't forward the logs. I just sat at my desk listening to the rain tap against the window, watching error reports roll in on a system that still bore my signature. People think revenge is loud, but the best kind is quiet, documented, and completely inevitable. The first crash didn't look like a crash, just a warning, a slight hesitation in the flow. One of their enterprise clients couldn't authenticate. Session timed out mid-purchase. Customer support flagged it as a token drift. That term meant something. To me, not to them. To them it was noise, a glitch. One of those things that would resolve itself overnight if you let the servers cool down. But I knew better. By hour 48, it was no longer a drift. It was a break. 3 separate auth nodes stopped syncing. The validation service, what was left of it, began throwing 403s at random. The junior engineer who had removed the concurrency check tried to roll it back. But he didn't know the rollback logic had dependencies. Dependencies he'd already deleted. Now requests were failing with no fallback. And worse, users were trying to refresh tokens manually, over and over, triggering a recursive flag I'd buried deep inside the system. The logs filled like a sink, then overflowed. Leo posted in Slack, "Hey all, quick heads up, small instability in auth, team is on it." But it wasn't small, and they weren't on it. Because the code they needed had been built for a different architecture, mine. And without me, they were flying blind. I checked the system telemetry through a passive node they forgot to decommission. The one tied to the old deployment monitoring script. Requests per second unstable, fail rate climbing, fallback queue maxed. Error messages were hitting live clients now. Not just internal testers. Companies paying 5 figures a month were locked out of their own data dashboards. Support lines filled. Slack DMs surged. Leo responded the only way he knew how, with optimism. "We're looking into it. Everything's fine." That was the sentence. The worst sentence you can type during a system failure. I watched silently as the crash spread. Not a big explosion, just widening cracks. Over the next 6 hours, they lost 12% of active sessions. 2 clients issued formal complaints. 1 paused billing. The system didn't die, but it stopped breathing right. By Sunday morning, the app was down for nearly 6 hours straight. The engineers tried rolling back to an earlier image, but the snapshot had been overwritten by a build labeled Final Stable Final. It wasn't. Leo disappeared from Slack for most of the day. No posts, no threads, no jokes about velocity. His silence said more than anything he could have typed. That evening, I got a text from a former teammate. "Hey, are you seeing this?" I didn't answer. He followed with, "They're panicking. You were right. I didn't need to be told." I could feel it in the logs, in the way the system kept trying to restart components that didn't exist anymore. The thing about back-end systems is they remember, even when people forget. Even when they rename functions or rewrite scripts, the foundation still follows its original design. Mine did. And now without support, it was falling apart on schedule. Monday morning, I refreshed their public status page. "We're experiencing elevated error rates across authentication services. Our team is actively investigating." That sentence again, polite, empty. Corporate for "we broke something and don't know how to fix it." Internally, the pressure was mounting. Investors wanted answers. Legal wanted clarity. Product leads wanted to know why their roadmap had just vanished behind a login wall. No one had said the word yet, but it was coming. Ownership. They were starting to ask who actually built what, and what rights they had to keep using it. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd pushed me out without a conversation. But now every conversation circled around me. Not my name, but my signature. Every function. Every logic gate. Every fallback system that had been renamed but not restructured. It was all still mine, down to the hex codes in the UI. The system didn't implode, it unraveled. Slow, precise, silent. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. Because the only person who understood the kill rate wasn't in the building anymore. And hadn't been for days. By Tuesday morning, the whispers started turning into meetings. Private ones. Short notice calendar blocks with vague titles like alignment session and executive check-in. The kind of meetings that means someone's in trouble, but no one wants to say who. I got the first hint through a forwarded message. An old contact from finance pinged me quietly. "Board is asking questions about IP." They didn't know about the clause. He didn't need an answer. He already knew. The clause wasn't in the new contracts, only in mine, and Leo had never read it. He just assumed that legacy meant expendable. Forgot that some systems are held together by more than just uptime. Around noon, Mitchell called. He usually doesn't. We mostly talk over email. But that day he wanted a voice. "They're moving," he said. "Not fast, not public. But inside, it's chaos." He'd been copied on a legal thread by accident, most likely. Internal counsel was trying to determine if the system could legally remain online. That wasn't a technical conversation. That was a liability one. They weren't asking, "How do we fix this?" They were asking, "What happens if we don't own it?" Leo, of course, hadn't responded to my original email. Not to the invoice. Not to the clause. Not even to the red receipt. But I wasn't expecting him to. I was waiting for the people above him to realize what he'd missed. It was always about them, not him. CTOs come and go. But investors, they don't like surprises. Especially ones that come with legal exposure and infrastructure outages in the same week. By mid-afternoon, I received a second message. This time from someone I hadn't heard from in almost a year. One of the VPs. Brief, polite, careful. "Would you be willing to speak just to clarify your side of things?" I stared at the message for a while. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted them to sit in the silence a little longer. Make them feel the delay. So I waited, 20 minutes, then replied with 2 words. "Not today." That evening, Leo tried to rally. He posted in the Slack channel again, the same one I'd never been invited to. "This is a speed bump, not a wall. Let's stay focused on the mission." No one replied. Just a thumbs up from a junior developer who probably still believed in company slogans. But the real replies weren't in Slack. They were in back-end alerts, in Git history trails, in emails marked urgent between people with titles that start with C and end in O. By Wednesday, something shifted. The company pushed a silent rollback, tried to reactivate an older framework. I could tell because one of the endpoints I'd deprecated months ago came back online poorly. They were reaching backward, trying to rebuild the engine mid-flight, but it was too late. The bugs weren't in the code anymore. They were in the trust, and that's harder to patch. Later that night, I received another email. Not from legal, not from operations, from a member of the board. The subject line was simple: request for licensing discussion, urgent. The tone was polite, measured, professional, which is to say they were worried. They asked if I'd consider a provisional licensing arrangement, just to stabilize core dependencies while longer-term terms were reviewed. I waited 10 minutes, then 20, then replied, "At this time, I am not open to licensing terms. I no longer trust your leadership's ability to steward my work." That was all. No signature, no threat, just a simple refusal. Not out of vengeance, out of design. I knew what that answer would do. Not to Leo, he was already fading, but to the room full of people who signed off on his vision. People who put money behind a system they didn't understand, and who now realized that legacy had legal consequences. The crash had passed, but the fallout was just beginning. What failed wasn't just software. It was the illusion of control. The idea that they could cut the architect out of the blueprint and still build a stable house. They'd launched my system without me. And now, piece by piece, they were realizing they didn't own the foundation. They were leasing it. And the landlord had changed the locks. By Friday morning, their homepage changed again. New banner, same tone. We're pausing updates to ensure long-term platform stability. No one outside the company would have thought much of it. Just another vague sentence in a sea of PR language. But I knew what it meant. The relaunch had been frozen. Mitchell sent me a copy of an internal memo that someone leaked through a back channel. 3 lines stood out. All feature rollouts paused. External communications restricted. Budget reallocation pending legal clarification on IP ownership. That was it. Not a war, not a scandal. Just a full stop. The kind that happens when no one in the room wants to be the first to admit what they missed. Ownership. It wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't even about the clause. It was about control. Who had the right to decide what the system could become? Who got to build, and who got to gatekeep? They assumed that once I was gone, the questions would stop. But instead, the questions had just begun. And the people asking them now wore suits instead of hoodies. That afternoon, I got another email. Not from legal this time, from Leo himself. First contact since the day he fired me. No subject line, just would be good to connect. Things got away from me. Hope you're open to a reset. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, I wasn't. But because nothing needed resetting. Everything was already where it needed to be. I'd built the thing they were trying to reboot. Line by line, hook by hook. The logic, the flow, the invisible guardrails they didn't even know they depended on, I'd written all of it. And now they were trying to replicate it under a different name with a different story, but the same foundation. And that foundation still followed my rules. Not because I said so, but because the code did. Later that night, I sat down and updated the invoice. It wasn't a game. It was accounting. 3 new line items. Unauthorized post-termination use, $612 $1,000. Security breach liability exposure, $370,000. Investor reported damages, $285,000. Total, 4691046. At the bottom, I added a sentence Mitchell suggested. Your team may retain continued access to the product stack under a provisional license for 30 days pending negotiation. Any further use beyond this period will trigger penalties as outlined. Simple, measured, no aggression, just terms. Then I printed clause 14.2 again. Same paper, same highlighter, same red circle in the margin. Only this time I scanned it and added one more thing. A sticky note in the top corner. Read it this time. No name, no signature, just that. The following Monday, the board issued a formal request. They wanted a licensing agreement. They used phrases like respecting prior contributions and securing continuity. But under the pleasantries, the message was clear. They needed the system to stay alive. And I was the only one who had the keys. I replied that afternoon. I am open to a temporary agreement under the following condition. IP ownership remains with me. You license the architecture month-to-month revocable at my discretion. No transfer, no auto-renewal. I hold the rights. You borrow access. The silence after that email lasted 3 days. Then Mitchell received a call from the same board member who once called my work too rigid for growth. Now he just wanted to talk. They thought removing me was cleaning house. But all they did was pull out the wiring and hope the lights stayed on. And now that the lights had flickered, now that the walls were starting to crack, they finally realized they weren't in control. They never were. Leo didn't resign. He disappeared. No LinkedIn post. No goodbye email. No camera-on farewell speech with teary metaphors about growth. Just silence. One day he was the face of the company. The next he was gone from the team page. Scrubbed. Like cached memory. Replaced by a placeholder photo of an interim CTO from a partner firm. I didn't need a formal update. The signs were already there. Slack activity 0. Git activity 0. Mentions muted. And then a leak. A screenshot of a board meeting agenda. Topic, Post-Ascend Transition Plan. That was his name, Leo Ascend. A name that always sounded made up. Like something you'd pick to seem larger than life. Now it was being boxed, archived, forgotten. The same people who laughed at his sunset, the scaffolding speech, were now untagging him in posts. People move fast when the center collapses, especially in tech, especially when money's involved. I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, a junior engineer, one of the last hires I trained before everything shifted. Hey, I found your old documentation. Didn't realize you'd built, well, everything. I replied with a single thumbs up, nothing else needed. They weren't looking for conversation. They were just trying to place things back in context. And for a moment I let myself feel something. Not pride, not satisfaction, just relief that the truth had quietly returned to the surface. The next morning, the interim CTO emailed Mitchell directly. No emotion, just business. We acknowledge your client's IP ownership and wish to avoid further dispute. Please advise on updated license terms. Use must continue uninterrupted to avoid client disruption. They finally said it, out loud. Ownership. Not contributions, not influence, not legacy. Ownership. The word they'd been avoiding for weeks. Mitchell and I revised the license agreement. Clean, short. No permanent transfer, no resale, no assumptions. Month to month. Revocable with 10 days notice. Veto rights on all architectural decisions touching the code base. It was surgical. Not to punish, but to make sure they never confused usage with entitlement again. The board signed. Shaky hands from what I heard, but signatures all the same. They needed to ship again, and I was the only one who could keep the system legal. So they paid. Not because they believed in me, but because they couldn't move without me. I wasn't reinstated. Didn't want to be. I didn't ask for a corner office. Didn't join their stand-ups. I came back in a different capacity. Private consultant, veto power. No meetings unless billable. No responsibilities beyond what I chose to engage with. And I kept my system. Not just the architecture, but the name behind it. The authorship. The decisions buried in every config, every script, every layer of fallbacks they once called too conservative. They didn't touch it anymore. Not without asking. Sometimes they asked, sometimes they waited, but they never assumed again. Leo's name never came up in official memos after that. But every now and then, I'd see traces. A comment thread in Jira referencing an old pitch deck. A leftover Slack reaction on an abandoned roadmap. Echoes of a guy who thought the system would bend to his will. But systems, real systems, don't care about charisma. They care about logic, about order, about the hands that first set their parameters. On my second screen, I kept a terminal window open. Always. Sometimes I'd glance at it while drinking coffee, just to see the logs scroll by. Each line a heartbeat, each process a rhythm I still recognized. Not out of control. Just observed, protected. They thought they'd erased me. But I never needed to stay in the room to be present. All I had to do was write the rules first. When I walked back through the building's front doors, no one clapped. No welcome party, no staged reunion. Just quiet glances from people who'd once avoided eye contact. The kind of silence you get when the storm has passed and everyone's trying to look busy while picking up what's left. That was fine. I didn't need acknowledgement. I wasn't back for that. They cleared a desk for me in the corner. Not that I used it much. I preferred to work remote. But it mattered to them. Symbolism, maybe. Or guilt. Either way, I let them have it. The nameplate read, Rowan Black Systems Advisor. Underneath it, Contractor in small font. I didn't ask for that line, but I didn't erase it either. It was accurate. My new contract was simple, 12 pages, reviewed line by Mitchell. Full IP retention, no work for hire clauses, license term month to month, termination at my discretion. Any product that touched the original code base, they needed approval. In writing. I didn't sit in on product meetings, didn't mentor junior engineers, didn't join Slack channels with names like Momentum or Next Wave. They knew better now. When they needed me, they sent a task request through the consulting portal. If it was worth my time, I replied. If not, they waited. And I liked it that way. No performance reviews. No vague feedback from execs who didn't know the difference between redundancy and resilience. Just me, the code, and the line they couldn't cross without asking. The interim CTO tried once. He wanted to streamline a routing layer I'd written for client-specific latency. Claimed it added unnecessary complexity. I denied the change. He pushed back. Mitchell sent a brief note. Clause 6.4. Rowan holds veto rights on inherited logic modules. The request was dropped. No hard feelings, no blow-up. Just a reminder. This wasn't collaboration. This was licensed access. Sometimes when I checked the system logs, I still saw traces of Leo. Naming conventions he'd forced into a dashboard. A code comment from a junior engineer mimicking one of his old phrases. Even a feature branch labeled Velocity V3 that hadn't been touched in weeks. Ghosts. His fingerprints had faded, but not completely vanished. It's hard to delete someone who never really knew what they were doing. I didn't ask what happened to him. Didn't need to. Someone told me he was consulting for a startup now. Something in crypto. Or maybe edtech. Didn't matter. He was out of infrastructure and out of reach. The system he tried to steal had swallowed him whole, and all I had to do was let it run its course. One afternoon I got a call from an investor. Not the loud one. The quiet one. The one who sat at the edge of board meetings and never asked a question until the final 5 minutes. He said, "We appreciate the way you handled this. You kept it clean." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Then he asked, "Would you ever consider coming back in full as an executive maybe?" I let the question hang, not for effect, just to let it breathe. Then I said, "I don't rebuild what's already mine. I rent it back to people who forgot who built it." He laughed, a single breath, then said goodbye. We haven't spoken since. Now months later, the system runs fine, stable, predictable. I still get access logs every morning. I still review licensing terms every quarter. Nothing surprises me, because nothing changed. Not really. They tried to rewrite the story, cut me out, brand it as something new. But every endpoint still calls back to my logic. Every feature still rests on the scaffolding I built when the company was just whiteboards and good intentions. And now they pay to keep it that way. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't kept the clause, if I hadn't documented, archived, prepared. But those thoughts pass quickly, because I did, and they didn't. That's the difference. The last note I wrote in my private log was short. System operational control maintained, noise gone. Then I closed the file, closed the laptop, and watched the logs keep ticking in line by line. Each one a quiet reminder that some systems don't crash. They just wait. If you've ever built something they tried to take from you and held your ground without saying a word, you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories that don't scream, but still hit.